Welcome back to New York Comic Con. I'm Megan Laux with CBR, and today I am joined with Tom King. Tom, how are you doing?
What a pleasure to be here. I've lost my voice.
It's okay.
I did like a 12-hour signing yesterday, and it cost me. But I went to a COVID tested. I'm COVID free. It's gonna be cool. Yes.
You were telling us a really cool story about this specific room right before we started rolling. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, this used to be back in, I don't know, like almost a decade ago. This was the DC green room where you sort of got sandwiches and stuff. And I came here I would go from con to con hand selling my novel, my Once Crowd Sky novel, trying to get comic fans to buy prose, which was such a stupid idea because it's much harder to write and read. Why would you ever do it? But I would do that from con to con. I came to this con, and the Batman editor asked me to come in and pitch him something in this very room. So this is the first time I professionally met with DC, and it was Mike Martz, and I sat across from him, and I pitched him. He's like, "What would you do with Batman?" I pitched him, and he's like, "That's terrible." And that was I walked out not doing anything. But he gave me his email address, and for a year, every Thursday, I would email him a Batman pitch.
Oh, wow.
And he would just ignore them. But when I eventually became the Batman writer, which happened like 2 years later, which is a little crazy, I had a year's worth of pitches, including what became the War of Jokes and Riddles, which is now like a big story and has kite mans and things. So yeah, it all started in this room.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
What a full circle moment, that's really neat.
Yeah, it just goes to show that, to get into comics, you have to be rejected many, many times.
Yeah.
That's the natural way of breaking in,
Yeah.
is to get slapped down a few times.
I saw on Twitter today you shared that Supergirl and The Human Target made a best of 2020 list. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the New York Public Library lists their best, which is apparently influential in other libraries, which is wonderful because my books, libraries are where people start with my books often. So yeah, they listed the top graphic novels of the year, and both those books got on there. Human Target, which is Greg Smallwood and I. He's carrying me on that book. I really appreciate any praise, but he's the star. And the same with Supergirl, where Bilkis Evely is just brilliant on art. But yeah, both of those books made the top 20. They're made it. Yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, I can't put. Supergirl was this little book that not that many people bought, and now it's become now the collection's together. I've been signing hundreds of them. It's like this little book that could. I'm so proud of it. I love
work
it.
at a comic book store, and Supergirl title just flies off the shelf every week it comes out.
The Supergirl title flies?
Yes.
Of course, yes, yeah. That's I'm sure that's true at every comic book store. Now that I think about it.
How do you handle writing titles for so many iconic characters?
I mean, it helps to grow up a nerd. I was very typical. Very stereotypical. I was the little kid who couldn't shoot a basket or throw a baseball and just wanted to sit in the corner and read comics. So it comes from sort of that place of that was my comfort as a child, and growing up, where if I wanted to be in a happy place, I was reading a comic book. So iconic characters, they start to live in your head. You read them. You have 9, 10 long boxes full of these things. They get stuck inside your soul. So I think it just kind of comes naturally. They're all sort of, when I ask them to talk, they're all in my head already.
That's great. You recently wrote a standalone One Bad Day Batman Riddler story.
I did, yeah.
Wow. I read that book recently, and it is so twisted and dark. How did you come up with that?
Mitch and I got the assignment, it was one of those assignments like, hey, have you guys ever heard of The Killing Joke? And we're like, yeah, it's been around. And they're like, can you guys do that but again? And we're like, oh, that's not good. That's a tough one. But we said yes because we're idiots. And Mitch and I sat down to come up with, and we read a bunch of Riddler stories, and we watched a lot of animated Riddler cartoons. And every Riddler story was basically the same. Some of them are awesome, but they're basically the Riddler comes up with a puzzle, Batman solves the puzzle, they fight at the end because Batman does some sort of little cheat in the puzzle, and then he wins. And we're like, oh, that's not going to help us because that's been done a bajillion times. And we're like, well, let's look at his origin story because maybe that's cool. And his origin story was the worst villain origin story of all time. His origin story was literally, the Riddler was a kid. He cheated on a test. He got caught. He decided to become the Riddler. That doesn't make any sense. It's like 2 + 2 = 73. It just doesn't, yeah. Or even like 2 + 2 = frog. It's like, it doesn't make sense. So we just took those two elements and twisted each of them, where we said, okay, well, what happens if he doesn't have a riddle? What happens if he kills someone and there's no reason? And then that's the start of a very dark thread. of why someone would kill someone without a reason. And then we talk like, and then the question of how does cheating on a test lead you to become a psycho? That means you have a lot of pressure in your, like the individual who would go through those symptoms, who would do 2 + 2 = frog, to get to that frog, there has to be something in your mind, something pressure from your life. And so then we started to build that story of why that test drove him insane. And so that sort of became the background of the story. So it started with us just looking and being like, it's impossible, and the impossible made it happen.
What were some of those Riddler stories that you were doing research on?
I mean, we watched the first animated story where he's a video game designer, and he does that. I read Scott has Year Zero, which is a wonderful story, a Riddler story. The first one, the Silver Age one, was super cool. The one that was very influential on me was Paul Dini's detective run, where he had Riddler, because Batman was out of town or something, and he had Riddler start to take on Batman's sort of mantle for a while. And so the theory that Dini had was that the Riddler was so smart, he could be as smart as Batman and solve it. And that was very influential. It was like, oh, like I had said this whole thing where Bane and Batman sort of were even because they had even wills. I was like, oh, what if the Riddler is smarter than Batman? What does that mean? And that kind of comes from the Paul Dini detective run, which is really brilliant if you want to go back and read it.
You have another book that's out called Gotham City Year One. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the idea is, to me, when you start writing Batman, I've written more Batman than anyone alive, I think, at this point. And there are some main characters in Batman. You know, there's Batman, obviously. There's Commissioner Gordon. There's Alfred. And then I feel like the fourth character after that is Gotham City, is the city itself. And I grew up in L.A. I went to school in New York. I live in D.C. My wife's from Chicago. I feel like I know American cities. And American cities aren't Gotham. I mean, they have their problems, they have their corruption, but Gotham is sinful in a way, and is corrupt in a way, and is broken in a way that those cities aren't. And I just had a simple question of why. You know, what makes Gotham different than any other city? How did it get that way? You know, who dropped that vase that shattered it into pieces? And so I was like, well, let's tell that story. Let's tell a story of Batman's grandparents and a crime that sort of ripped the city apart and sort of found the edges and sort of the hard places and soft places and tore it apart. And so that became Gotham City Year One, with our detective being Slam Bradley, who of course was in Detective #1 and was created by Superman's creators. So it all sort of comes back to old comics, like it usually does with me.
Yeah. You recently wrote, well, a few years ago, one of my favorite DC stories, Heroes in Crisis. I love that story.
Oh, so you were the one person who loved it. I finally found you. I've been looking for you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's real sweet. Yeah. Oh, man, people hate that poor little book, and I love it so much.
Yeah, can you tell us, what do you think makes that book so divisive?
I think the casting on it makes it divisive. Well, there's two things. Number one, it has a terrible title. I should have come up with a better title. I called it Heroes in Crisis. Every time I see the title, I was like, oh, I should have called it Sanctuary. That's a much better title than Heroes in Crisis. I was just going for the Crisis title, probably just to make money. That's a good lesson to all young creators. Like, go for the art, not the money. So that's number one. And number two, Wally West had been set up from Rebirth as sort of the new hope of the universe. And I came up with the main characters, and he was sort of. And then DC told me, okay, this is the cast. I was like, these are the two. I need two suspects and an actual murderer. And they said, okay, it's going to be Booster, Harley, and Wally. And I was like, that's great. That was my big mistake. I should not have said that was great, because making Wally, who was that big hope, even though to me, there was such sadness in his rebirth because he got reborn without his family. And to me, that is a horrible thing. I have children, I have a wife, I live for them. And like, oh great, I'm back. My family's back. Wonderful. Or my uncles, like my superhero family's back, but my real family is gone. Like, to me, that would tear my soul apart, and that's what it's about. It's about him sort of experiencing that. But the audience, I think a large chunk of the audience, because he was the symbol of rebirth, was like, I know he has that, but we still love him as this person. It's like, it's like movie casting. You don't want to see The Rock looking out the window and crying. You want to see him punching somebody. I just think he was cast poorly. If I had to do it again, I would cast a different thing. But besides, I think it's a wonderful thing. It speaks to issues that are really important to me, and it's drawn by Clay Mann, and it's the most beautiful art you've ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. I love the book. So.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Is there any other DC characters that you haven't written yet that you would love to explore?
I mean, for me, it's never about the characters. Although I should mention, I'm doing a book called Danger Street, which is like about the most obscure characters in the DC universe, and it's the most fun I've ever had writing. It's about characters, it's about the dingbats of Danger Street, it's about Lady Cop, it's about the outsiders, not that outsiders, like a much more obscure outsiders. Codename Assassin, who doesn't love Codename? No one's ever heard of it. And I got to combine all those characters into one new book, and it's with Jorge Fornes drawing it, and it's just absolutely just so much fun doing these obscure characters. So I don't think there's any character in DC I wouldn't want to write. Maybe Brother Power the Geek, that's a little weird one, but besides that, I think all the rest are on the table and are fun. Yeah. The Flash, I probably wouldn't want to write. Probably because I just told you about it. But I always find him hard to write because I don't understand how he has a fight. Like, how does he ever fight the weather wizard? Like, the weather wizard comes out of a bank and is like, I just robbed the bank. And then, like, Barry is like, no, you shouldn't have done that. Like, why doesn't he just go faster than the speed of light and already have kid? But why do they ever have a conversation? I wouldn't want to write the Flash. So everyone but the Flash and Brother Geek.
Okay, good to know. I have 2 fan questions from Twitter that I'd like
That's
to ask
awesome.
you. Yeah. Do you think that your Batman, all the Batman stories you're doing, is like your own Kingverse of comics, such as like a Frank Miller situation?
No, because I don't think of Frank Miller as being either of those books as being separate. I always think of those books as being sort of the alpha and omega of continuity. That's the start and end of Batman. I don't think of that as being like a separate Frankverse. Mm-hmm. And so I hope not. No, I think, stories like One Bad Day that's in continuity. Stories like I think of the wedding that we wrote in Batcat as being like that's what happens next year. Just like 1 year away from it. Like a Dark Knight Returns. That's what happens 20 years from now. So that's what I think of it. No, I feel like they're all in DC continuity, unless someone tells me different. If Jim Lee calls me and is like, no, Tom, that's not happening, then I'll back off. But as far as I know, I think what makes them in continuity, what makes them work, is the fan love. Fans make continuity. It's fans responding to things and saying, yeah, the Court of Owls is amazing. We need more Court of Owls. Suddenly, Court of Owls is continuity. That's what makes it. That's what makes continuity. So if the fans like it, then it's real. If they hate it, like Wally's been totally undone because people hated it. That does happen.
What is your favorite thing to put into the Batman mythology during the time that you were writing Batman?
I mean, it seems ridiculous now, but especially since Hush happened before my book, where it was a big Bat-Cat romance. But when I first came to that book, Batman and Catwoman were nowhere near romance. They hadn't been together in 5 years, and I think that was kind of almost forgotten. When I first pitched Catwoman, people were like, Catwoman, is she even cool? So I think putting them as sort of their romance and their love at the center of everything, and then we got to see like literal panels that Clay drew became alive in a movie. With them sort of standing in front of a sunset and holding hands. I think that's sort of the connection between those characters and recentering that relationship, I think is probably my biggest legacy so far. Hopefully, yeah, so far.
Finally, I want to ask you, what can fans expect to see from the next few issues of Gotham City Year 1?
I've written a lot of stuff where I kind of deconstruct genres. I sort of take them apart, like I'm doing a book called Love Everlasting, which is, a deconstruction of romance. This is not a this is pure genre. This is like a sip of whiskey. This is utter noir. This is for if you like, hard, smoky detective stories with a huge mystery that keeps unraveling and raveling again. That's what Gotham Year 1 is. It's not a deconstruction. It's just the best I can do in this genre, and there's like incredible twists and punch the guts coming. It's a Tom King comic. There will be people looking out the rain and crying, but there will also be some sort of hope and redemption in it too.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
I can't believe I said my name in the third person. My voice is dying.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Megan Laux with CBR. Make sure to check out Gotham City Year 1 in stores now. Right?
In stores now, yeah. Just came out.
Just came out. And make sure to check out CBR for more New York City Comic-Con content.
Can I just say thank you? Thank you for being here. Thank you for talking about my books. Thank you. CBR is the site I go through for comic book news, and I just appreciate everything you do for being here for so many years since the very beginning of my career, supporting me. I'm very grateful to you and your readers.
Oh, of course. Anytime. We love it. We love your work.
Sweet.